but over the mists he could hear the cattle bawling and the cowboys hollering at them. Probably a herd had been bedded nearby, and the boys were trying to get them moving. Joe was yawning and trying to get awake. The hardest part of traveling was trying to start early. Just when he was sleeping best, July would get up and start saddling his horse. By the time the sun was beginning to thin out the mists, they had had their coffee and a bite of bacon and were horseback. The herd was in sight, spread out over the plain for 3 or 4 miles, thousands of cattle in it. Neither July nor Joe had ever seen a herd so large, and they paused for a moment to look at it. The morning plains were still dewy. "How many is it?" Joe asked. He had never dreamed there could be so many cattle in one place. "I don't know. Thousands," July said. "I've heard South Texas is nothing but cattle." Though the herd was in progress, the camp crew wasn't. The cook was packing his pots and skillets into a wagon. "I guess we ought to ask them if they've seen Roscoe," July said. "He could be south of us. Or they might have news of Jake." They loped over to the wagon just as the wrangler turned loose the horse herd. The horses, 50 or 60 of them, were jumping, frisking, kicking up their heels, nickering at one another, glad to be moving. July and Joe waited until the wrangler had them headed north before trotting on toward the wagon. The cook wore an old black hat and had a long, dirty beard. "You're too late, boys," he said. "The hands just ate me out of breakfast." "Well, we've ate," July said, noticing for the first time a man sitting on a tarp by the ashes of a campfire. The unusual thing about the man was that he was reading a book. His horse, a fine-looking black, was saddled and grazing a few yards away. "Where would I find the boss?" July asked, addressing himself to the old cook. "I'm the boss. That's why I've got time to read," the reading man said. "My name's Will Barker." He wore iron-rimmed spectacles. "I like to snatch a minute from Mr. Milton, and the morning's my only hope," Will Barker added. "At night, I'm apt to be in a stampede, and you can't read Mr. Milton during a stampede. Not and take his sense. My days are mostly taken up with lunkheads, and weather, and sick horses, but I sometimes get a moment of peace after breakfast." The man looked at them sternly from his
"Hey,
glass.
Fire, how you doing?"
Joe, who had hated what little schooling he'd had, was at a loss to know why a grown man would sit around and read on a pretty day. "I'm sorry to interrupt you," July said. "You
I
a
got
lawman?"
one rolled
Will
up. I
Barker
got roll
asked,
up one
his
more,
impatient way.
but I'm throwing
"I
a
am," July said.
real quick grub real quick.
"Then you're going to have to listen to some complaints about the law in this state," Will Barker said. "I've never seen a place with less law. Farther south you go, the worse the horse thieves get. Along the border, they're thicker than ticks." "Well, I ain't from Texas. I'm from Arkansas," July said. "It's a weak excuse," Will Barker said, marking his place with a grass blade and standing up. "I didn't notice much law in Arkansas either. There's law of sorts in New Orleans, but out here it's every man for himself."
Gas station
"Well,
nuggets.
there's Texas Rangers, but I guess they mostly
Or
fight
sort
Indians,"
of a gas station.
wondering where the conversation would end.
Gas station
"Yes, I
/
met a couple,"
convenience
Will
store.
Barker said. "They were excellent horse thieves themselves. They stole my remuda back from some sly Mexicans. Are you looking for a killer or what?" "Yes, a man named Jake Spoon," July said. "He killed a dentist in Fort Smith." Will Barker tucked his book carefully into his bedroll and tossed the bedroll in the back of the wagon. "You overshot Mr. Spoon," he said. "He was recently seen in the town of Lonesome, where he won $20 from a hand of mine. However, he's headed this way. He's partnered up with the gentleman who got my horses back. If I were you, I'd camp here and put this boy in school. They'll be along in 2 or 3 weeks." "Well, thank you for the information," July said. "I don't suppose you've run across a man named Roscoe Brown on the trail?" "Nope. Who'd he kill?" Will Barker asked. "Nobody," July said. "He's my deputy.
Right.
It may be that he's lost." "The name Roscoe don't inspire confidence," Will Barker said. "People named Roscoe ought to stick to clerking. However, it's summertime. At least your man won't freeze to
This
death.
store is
Any more people you're looking for?"
It's called all subs.
No, just them two, July said,
They're all
refraining from
over
mentioning Elmira.
New Mexico, but they have really good
Will
food
Barker
in their
mounted.
little hot box.
I hope you hang that spoon promptly, he said. I expect he's a card cheat. Card cheats undermine society faster than anything. And if you find your deputy, see if you can steer him into clerking. With that, he trotted over to the cook. You coming with us, Bob? He asked. No, the cook said. I'm planning to marry and settle down here in North Texas. Now, I hope you marry somebody who can cook, Will Barker said. If you do, let me know. When she gets ready to leave you, I'll hire her. He looked around at Joe. Need a job, son? He asked. We need a boy that don't ask questions and is handy with an axe. I don't know about your chopping skills, but you ain't asked a question yet. Will Barker seemed serious, and July was tempted to let Joe do it. Going north with a herd would be good experience for him. The main advantage, though, was that he himself could then travel alone with just his thoughts. Without Joe to look after, he could better accomplish the main task ahead, which was to find Elmira. Joe was startled. He had never expected to be offered a job with a cow outfit, and hearing the words was a thrill. But of course he couldn't take it. He had been assigned to July. Much obliged, he said. I reckon I can. Well, the job's open, Will Barker said. We may meet again. I've got to lope up to the Red River and see if I think the water's fresh enough for my stock. What'll you do if it ain't? Joe asked. He had never known anyone who just said one unusual thing after another, as Will Barker did. How could the water in a river not be fresh enough for cows? Well, I could piss in it to show it what I thought of it, Will Barker said. Could you use any company? July asked. We're going up that way. Oh, I can always use good conversation when I can get it, Will Barker said. I was brought up to expect good conversation. Then I run off to the wilderness, and it's been spotty ever since. Why are you going north when the man you want is to the south? I've got other business as well, July said. He didn't want to describe it, though. He hadn't meant to ask Will Barker if they could ride along. He wouldn't ordinarily have done it. But then his life was no longer ordinary. His wife was lost, and his deputy also. He felt more confused than he ever had in his life, whereas Will Barker was a man who seemed far less confused than most. He seemed to know his mind immediately, whatever the question put to it. Will Barker started at once and loped several miles without speaking. Joe loped with him. The country was open, lightly spotted with elm and post oak. They came to a fair-sized stream, and Will Barker stopped to water his horse. Have you been to Colorado? July asked. Yes, once, Will Barker said. Denver's no worse than most towns out here. I intend to avoid that country, though. The Indians in those parts ain't entirely reformed, and the outlaws are meaner than the Indians, with less excuse. It was not comforting talk when one's wife was said to be on a whiskey boat going up the Arkansas. Planning a trip to Colorado? Will Barker asked. I don't know, July said. Maybe. Well, if you go up on the plains and get scalped, there'll be that much less law in Arkansas, Will Barker said. But then there might not be that much crime in Arkansas now. I guess most of the crimes moved to Texas. July wasn't listening. He was trying to convince himself that Peach was wrong, that Elmira had just gone wandering for a few days. When Will Barker started to move on, July did not. Thanks for the company, he said. I think we better go look for my deputy. There's a perfectly straight trail from Fort Smith into Texas, Will Barker said. Captain Marcy laid it out. If that deputy can't even stay on a road, I expect you ought to fire him. Then he loped away without saying goodbye. Joe wished they were going with him. In only a few hours, the man had paid him several compliments and had offered to hire him.
There's only like
He found
3
himself
pieces.
feeling resentful of both July and Roscoe. July didn't seem to know what he wanted to do. And as far as Roscoe, if he couldn't stay in a road, then he deserved to be lost. He wished he had spoken up and grabbed the job when Will Barger offered it. But the moment had been missed. Will Barger was already out of sight, and they were still sitting there. July looked depressed, as he had ever since they had left Fort Smith. Finally, without a word, he turned east, back toward Arkansas. Joe wished he was old enough to point out to July that nothing he was doing made any sense, but he knew July probably wouldn't even hear him in the state he was in. Joe felt annoyed, but he kept quiet and followed along.
Chapter 52.
The amazing thing about Janie and Roscoe's view was that she knew her way. Almost as amazing was that she liked to walk. The first day or two, it felt a little wrong that he was riding and she was walking, but she was just a slip of a girl. He was a grown man and a deputy besides. He pointed out to her that she was welcome to ride. She weighed practically nothing. Anyway, they weren't traveling fast enough to tie
I was able to get a little bit of
but
wax
Janie
today.
didn't want to ride. I'll walk, and all you have to do is keep up, she said.
There to pick up
Of course, it was no trouble for a
7
man on
grams.
horseback to keep up with a girl on foot, and Roscoe began to relax and even enjoy the trip a little. It was pretty weather. All he had to do was trot along and think. What he mostly thought about was how surprised July would be when they showed up.
So we
and
do
told
a
him
dab
the
or
news.
two, whatever.
Not only could Janie
After
keep
I
them
get
on
this
the trail,
next one
but she
rolled
was
up.
also extremely useful when it came to rounding up grub. Once they got settled in a camp at night, she would disappear and come back 5 minutes later with a rabbit or a possum or a couple of squirrels. She could even catch birds. Once she came back with a fat brownish bird of a sort Roscoe had never seen. "Now, what bird is that?" he asked. "Prairie chicken," Janie said. "There was two. One got away." They ate the prairie chicken, and it was as good as any regular chicken Roscoe had ever had. Janie cracked open the bones with her teeth and sucked out the marrow.
Yeah,
The
hopefully
only
it
problem
does.
with her at all,
At least I'm going to try to make it.
was that she was tormented by bad dreams and whimpered at night. Roscoe loaned her a blanket, thinking she might be cold, but that wasn't it. Even wrapped in a blanket, she still whimpered, and because of that, didn't sleep much. He would awake in the grayness just before dawn and see Janie sitting up, stirring a little campfire and scratching her ankles. She was barefoot, of course, and her ankles and shins were scratched by the rough grass she went through each day. "Did you never have any shoes?" he asked once. "Never did," Janie said, as if it didn't matter. The only time she would consent to crawl up on the horse was when they had a sizable creek to cross. She didn't like wading in deep water. "Afraid of them snappers," she said. "One of them was to bite me, I'd die." "They're mighty slow," Roscoe said, "and easy to outrun them." "I dream about them," Janie said, not reassured. "They just keep coming, and I can't run." Except for snapping turtles and sleep, she seemed to fear nothing. Many times, coiled rattlers would sing at them as they traveled, and Janie would never give the snakes a glance. Old Memphis was more nervous about snakes than she was, and Roscoe more nervous than either one of them. He had once heard of a man being bitten by a rattlesnake that had gotten up in a tree. According to the story, the snake had dropped right off a limb and onto the man and had bitten him in the neck. Roscoe imagined how unpleasant it could be to have the snake drop on one's neck. He took care to ride under as few limbs as possible and was glad to see the trees thinning out as they rode west. It seemed they were on a fairly good trail, for every day they encountered 3 or 4 travelers, sometimes more. Once they caught up with a family plodding along in a wagon. It was such a large family that it looked like a small town on the move, particularly if you wanted to count the livestock. The old man of the family who was driving the team didn't seem talkative, but his wife was. "We're from Missouri," she said. "We're going west, and I guess we'll stop when we feel like it. We've got 14 young'uns and are hoping to establish a farm." 8 or 9 of the young ones were riding in the wagon. They stared at Roscoe and Janie, as silent as owls. Several times they met soldiers going east toward Fort Smith. The soldiers were a taciturn lot and passed without much talk. Roscoe attempted to inquire about July, but the soldiers made it clear that they had better things to do than keep a lookout for Arkansas sheriffs. Janie was shy of people. She had keen eyesight and would usually see other travelers before Roscoe did. Often when she saw one, she disappeared, darting off the trail and hiding in weeds, tall grass, until the stranger passed. "What are you hiding for?" Roscoe asked. "Them soldiers ain't after you." "Bill might be with him," Janie said. "Bill who?" "Bill," she repeated. "He gave me to old Sam, and I ain't going with Bill again." She continued to hide at the approach of strangers, and once in a while Roscoe had to admit that it was well she did. There were some rough customers traveling the trail. One day they met two dirty-looking men with greasy beards and 6 or 7 guns between them. Roscoe had an anxious moment, for the men stopped him and asked to borrow tobacco. The fact that he was traveling without any didn't sit well with them, and they looked as if they might contest the issue. "I reckon you're lying," one said. He was a small fellow, but had mean little eyes, and was generally more frightening than his companion, a man the size of an ox, who seemed to take no interest in the conversation. "Why would a man travel without nothing to smoke?" I asked. "Well, it never agreed with me," Roscoe explained. "I had to give it up." "If you was more dried up, I guess we could smoke you," the little one said with mean intent. But the men rode on, and Roscoe soon forgot about them and began to feel drowsy. The day was muggy. Occasionally he would see lightning flicker in the west. After a while it struck him that something was missing, and he figured out that it was Janie. Usually, once the travelers were out of sight, she reappeared. Memphis had come to trust her and would follow her like a pet goat. Only this time she wasn't there to follow. Roscoe looked all around, and there wasn't a soul in sight, though the plain stretched out and he could see for miles. He was alone, by no means sure of his direction. It scared him. He had come to depend on the girl, even though she was loud.
I definitely gotta get my
He yelled a time or two, but got
that
no
chip
response.
in my
The fact that he could see
my
so
dab
far
knife
scared him a little. He'd been
replaced,
raised in the land of
especially for
trees,
this
and was not
stuff.
used to country that looked so long and empty.
Oh
How he could have lost
there it
Janie
is.
in such an
'Cause now I
open
gotta
place was a mystery to him. He sat still for a
Yes.
while, hoping she would pop up,
Oh,
but she didn't.
now I gotta
And
milk
finally
this
he
dab
rode on
off.
at a slow walk. An hour passed, then another, and Roscoe was forced to consider the possibility that he might have lost the girl. One of the snakes she took so little notice of could have bitten her. She could be dying
There we
somewhere back along the trail. If she wasn't going to reappear, it was his duty to go back and find her. And, as sunset was not far off, and it looked like thunderstorms were on the way, he had better hurry. He had turned and started back at a trot, but had not gone 20 paces before Janie popped up from behind a bush and jumped right on Memphis. "They're following," she said. "I've been watching. I guess they want to kill you." "Well, they won't find no tobacco, even if they do," Roscoe said. Still, the little one had had a bad pair of eyes. He could easily believe they meant to harm him. He wheeled the horse
two
around and
rolled
started
up.
to put him into a run.
We
Janie
can do
jerked
some,
on the reins. "They're in
do
front of
some
us," she said.
dabs,
"They got around you while you was
and
poking
then
along."
we'll start round 1.
Roscoe had never felt so at a loss. There was not so much as a tree in sight, and it was a long way back to Fort Smith. He didn't see how the men could expect to ambush him in the open plain. "Darn," he said, feeling hopeless. "I can't figure out which way to run." Janie pointed north. "Up that way," she said. "There's a gully." Roscoe couldn't see what good a gully would do, but he took her advice, and they set off north in a dead run. Memphis was shocked to be spurred into a run, but once he got started, he ran with a will. Once again, Janie was right. They had only been running half a mile when they struck a big gully. Roscoe stopped and looked around. Not a soul was in sight, which made him feel silly. What were they to do next? "Can you shoot?" Janie asked. Well, I have shot, Roscoe said. There ain't been nobody much to shoot at in Fort Smith. Sometimes July and I shoot at pumpkins or bottles and things. July's a good shot, but I'm just fair. I expect I could hit that big fellow, but I don't know about the little one. Give me the pistol. I'll shoot it for you, Janie said. What'd you ever shoot? He asked, surprised. Give it to me, Janie said. And when he slowly handed it over, she hopped off the horse, climbed out of the gully, and disappeared. 5 minutes later, before he could even untie his tarp, it began to rain. Lightning started hitting the ground, and it rained in torrents. Roscoe got totally soaked. In 10 minutes, there was a little river running down the middle of the gully. Though the gully had been bone dry when they rode up, the thunder crashed and it grew dark. Roscoe felt that he had never hated travel so much, not even when the pigs chased him. He was alone and likely either to be drowned or shot before the night was over, or even well begun. He remembered how snug and secure the jail was back at Fort Smith, how nice it was to come in slightly drunk and have a comfortable couch to lie on. It was a life he fervently wished he had never left. The rain increased until it seemed to Roscoe it was raining as hard as it could possibly rain. He didn't try to seek shelter, for there was none. It was uncomfortable to be so soaked, but since the water was probably all that was keeping him from being murdered by the little man with the mean eyes, it was silly to complain. Roscoe just sat, hoping that the little creek that filled the gully wouldn't rise enough to drown him. The storm turned out to be just a heavy shower. In 10 minutes, the rain lightened. Soon it was barely sprinkling. The sun had set, which there was a clear band of sky under the clouds, and the clouds were thinning. The band of sky became red with afterglow. Above it, as the clouds thinned, was a band of white, and then a deep blue. With an evening sky, Roscoe dismounted and stood there dripping, aware that he ought to be planning some form of defense, but unable to think of it. It seemed to him the storm might have discouraged the two men. Maybe one of them had even been struck by lightning. Before he could draw much comfort from that line of speculation, he heard his own gun go off. A second or two later, it went off again, and then again. The sound came from just north of the gully.
I think I got a little
As
too
he
much
could not
in there.
be any wetter and could not
This one
stand the
definitely
suspense
splattered
of knowing
everywhere.
what was going on,
You get
he
it
waded
joint
the
out
little
and
creek and climbed the bank,
wrap it up.
only to look and see the barrels of a shotgun not a yard from his face. The Oxford man held the shotgun. In his big hands it looked tiny, though the barrels in Roscoe's face seemed as big as cannons. Clamber on up here, traveler, the big man said. July had told him never to argue with a loaded gun, and Roscoe had no intention of disobeying his instructions. He climbed up the muddy bank and saw that Janie was involved in a tussle with the little outlaw. He had her down and straddled of her and was trying to tie her, but Janie was wiggling desperately. She was covered with mud, and in the wet, slick grass was proving hard to subdue. The man cuffed her twice, but the blows had no effect, Roscoe could
Put a
see.
nice little ring or
The
some
big
dab
man with the
around it.
shotgun seemed to find the tussle amusing.
I
He
look too
walked over
much
for
and
a
it
closer
splashed
look, though
over.
he continued to keep the shotgun
Because I
pointed
put
at
too
Roscoe.
much in it, all around like the
Why don't you
outside
just
part
shoot
would
her?
be
He
splashed
asked.
over. So
She was
excuse me.
willing to shoot you.
So
The little
instead
man
of
didn't
wasting
answer. He
it,
was breathing hard.
I just
He continued
do a
to
little
try
ring
to tie
around my
Janie's wrist.
the top of the
Roscoe
joint,
had to
and
admire Janie's spunk. The situation looked hopeless.
you got
but
a
she kept struggling, twisting around.
you got a
and
little extra
scratching
added
at the
to your
man where
joint.
she could. Finally, the big man stepped in and planted a muddy boot on one of her arms, enabling his companion to tie her wrists. The little man cuffed her again for good measure and sat back to get his breath. He looked around at Roscoe, his eyes as bad as ever. Where'd you get this feisty rabbit? He asked. She darn near shot me and she nicked Hooto. We're from Arkansas, Roscoe said. He felt foolish for having given Janie the pistol. After all, he was the deputy. On the other hand, if they had seen him shoot, the men might have shot back. Let's just shoot him and take the horse, Hooto, the big man said. We could have done it this afternoon and saved all this time. Yeah, and the darn soldiers would have found it, the other said. You can't just leave bodies lying right in the road no more. Somebody's apt to take an interest. Jim, you're too nervous, Uto said. Anyway, this ain't a road. We ain't far from the territory. Let's shoot them and take what they got. What have they got, by God? Jim asked. Go bring the horse. Uto brought them themselves for a few minutes by the bedroll and saddlebags. One kept Roscoe covered with a shotgun, while the other emptied the contents of the saddlebags carelessly on the wet grass. What they saw was very disappointing to them. All right, Jim, I told you they looked like a waste of time, Uto said. Well, there's a horse, at least, Jim said. Then he gave Roscoe a mean look. Strip off them duds, he said. What? Roscoe asked. Strip off them duds, the man repeated. He picked up Roscoe's pistol, which had fallen in the ground, and pointed it at him. Why must I, Roscoe? Well, your underwear might fit me, Jim suggested. You ain't got much else to offer. Roscoe was forced to take off every bit of clothing. He felt
You gotta
miserable
charge this
taking
up.
off his boots, for he
While
knew
this is
that,
charging,
wet as they were, he'd
give
be
me
lucky
1
to get
second
back
and
on. But then if he was dead, when he got down to his long
give
jump,
me 1 second and I'll go grab my
for after
other
all,
dab
he
break.
was sitting there watching. She was
Get a
wet,
drink first.
muddy, hadn't said a word. The man seemed to think he might have money sewed in his long johns and insisted that he take them off. Uto poked him with the barrels of the shotgun, something he couldn't ignore. He took them off and stood there naked, hoping Janie wouldn't look. Of course, the men found the $30 he was carrying in his old wallet. It represented a month's wages. It was all he had to finish the trip with. But they had found that before they made him strip. They seemed reluctant to believe it was all the money he had, and casually proceeded to pick his clothes apart with their knives. The $30 is all I got, he said several times. I guess you wouldn't be the first man to lie, Jim said, picking at the seams of his pants to see if he had any greenbacks sewed in. Roscoe was appalled, for the clothes that were being destroyed were the only ones he owned. Then he remembered that he was going to be killed anyway and felt a little better. It was very embarrassing to him to have to stand there naked. The men weren't watching Janie. They were too intent on trying to find money in the saddlebags. While they were all ignoring her, she had been quietly scooting backwards on the slick grass. Jim had his back to her, and Uto was winding Roscoe's old pocket watch. Roscoe happened to look and saw that Janie was quietly creeping away. They had tied her hands, but had neglected her feet. Suddenly, she began to run. It was deep dusk, and in a second she had gotten into the tall grass north of the gully. She made no sound, but Uto must have sensed something, for he whirled and let go a blast with a shotgun. Roscoe flinched. Uto fired the other barrel, and Jim turned and shot 3 times with Roscoe's own pistol, which he had stuck in his belt. Roscoe peered into the dusk, but there was no sign of Janie. The bandits looked too, with no better luck. You reckon we hit her? Jim asked. Nope, Uto said. She got in that tall grass. Well, she could be hit, Jim said. Now, I could be General Lee, only I ain't, Uto remarked, looking disgusted. Why didn't you tie her feet? Why didn't you? Jim retorted. I wasn't sitting on her, Uto said. You watch this one and I'll go catch her, Jim said. I bet once I do, she won't get away for a while. Why, Jim, you can't catch her, Uto said. In this dark? Remember how she ambushed us? If she was a better shot, we'd both be corpses. And if she's got a rifle hid out there somewhere, we may be corpses yet. I ain't scared of her, Jim said. Darn her, I should have
Get
cracked
one
her
more
with a
dab
gun
out of
barrel
this,
a time or two. You should have shot her, Uto
well,
said.
whatchamacallit.
I know you expected to amuse yourself, but look how it turned out. The girl got away, and the deputy only had $30 and some dirty underwear. She can't be far, Jim said. Let's camp.
One
and
more
look forward
dab
to
and
the
then
morning.
let's
Well, you
Start
can, but I'm
round
going,
one.
Hutto said. A girl that size ain't worth tracking. Just as he said it, a good-sized rock came flying through the air and hit him right in the mouth. He was so surprised he slipped and sat down. The rock had smashed his lips. Blood poured down his chin. A second later, another hit Jim in the ribs. Jim drew a pistol, fired several times in the direction the rocks came from. Oh, stop wasting shells, Hutto said. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Two more rocks came flying in, both aimed at Jim. One hit him right in the elbow, causing him to tumble over in pain. The other flew over his head. Hutto seemed to think the whole thing was funny. He sat on the muddy ground, laughing and spitting great mouthfuls of blood. Jim crouched down, pistol drawn, watching for rocks. This beats all I ever heard of. Here we are in a rock fight with a girl no bigger in a minute, and she's winning. If the news of this gets out, we'll have to retire. He looked at Roscoe, who was standing stock still. One of the rocks had just missed him. He didn't want to move and risk interfering with Janie's aim. By God, when I get her, she'll wish she'd kept it running, Jim said, cocking his gun. A second later, a rock hit him on the shoulder, and the gun went off. Furious, he fired in the darkness until the pistol went. Well, we'll sure have to kill this deputy now, Hutto remarked. He wiggled a loose tooth with a bloody finger. If he was to tell about this, our reputation as desperados would be ruined forever. Then why don't you get up and help me rush her, Jim said. Oh, I think we should just sit here and let her chunk us to death, Hutto said. I think it serves us right for being idiots. You was scared of this deputy when he ain't no more dangerous than a chicken. Maybe next time you'll be content to shoot when I want to shoot. Jim opened his pistol.
Give me a second.
He was trying to reload and watch for rocks.
Start round one.
Squinting in the darkness.
Round one got me a
Another rock came in low, and he managed to turn and take it on his thigh, but it caused him to drop 3 bullets. Roscoe was beginning to feel more hopeful. He was remembering all the varmints Janie had brought into camp. Probably she had used them to sharpen her aim. His hope was that she'd start throwing for the head before the men got around to killing him. Hutto was calmer than Jim. He reached over and got his shotgun and broke the breech. I'll tell you, Jim, he said. You just keep sitting there drawing her fire. I'll load up with some buckshot. Maybe if she don't brain you before the moon rises, I can catch the angle and shoot her. Or at least chase her out of chunking range. He reached into the pocket of his buckskin coat for some shells. As he did, a miracle happened. For in Roscoe's mind, a miracle it was. He stood there, naked and wet, sure to be murdered within a few minutes unless a slip of a girl armed with only rocks could defeat 2 grown men armed with guns. He himself was so sure of being killed that he felt rather detached from what was happening, and invested only faint hope in Janie's chances of saving him. Nobody saw July come. Hutto was reaching in his pocket for shells, and Jim was trying to fish those he had dropped out of the mud. Roscoe was watching Jim, whom he liked least. He was hoping to see a big rock hit Jim right between the eyes, perhaps cracking his skull. It wouldn't stop Hutto from killing him, but it would be some consolation if Jim got his skull cracked first. Then, at the same moment, Jim, Hutto, and he himself all became aware that someone was there who hadn't been. It was July Johnson, standing behind Jim with his pistol drawn and cocked. You won't need them shells, July said quietly. You just leave them lie. Well, you son of a bitch, Jim said. What gives you the right to pull a gun on me? Jim looked up, and just as he did, the rock Roscoe had been hoping for sailed in and hit him right in the throat. He dropped his gun and fell over backwards. He lay there, clutching his throat, trying desperately to draw a breath. Hutto had 2 shotgun shells in his hand and didn't try to shove them in the shotgun. I've had bad luck before, but nothing to top this, he said, ignoring July and looking at Roscoe. Can't you at least make that gal stop throwing rocks? Roscoe was having trouble believing what he saw. He felt he had missed a step or two, proceeding somehow. Are you going to get your clothes on, or are you just going to stand there? July asked. It sounded like July, and it looked like July, so Roscoe was forced to conclude that he was saved. He had been in the process of adjusting to impending death, and it seemed to him a part of him must already have left for the other place, because he felt sort of absent, dull. Ordinarily, he would not have stood around on a muddy prairie naked, and yet in some ways it was easier than having to pick up the pieces of his life again, which meant, first off, having literally to pick up pieces of his clothes. They cut up my duds, he said to July. I doubt I'll ever be able to get them boots back on, wet as they are. Joe, bring the handcuffs, July said. Joe walked into camp. Two sets of
Start this one
handcuffs.
because
It shocked him
this
to see
one's a
Roscoe
regular
naked.
weed one that I.
I've never seen so many youngins.
And then
Can this one throw
is the
rocks
roast
too?
beef one. But we're going to
Who
start
is
with
throwing rocks?
the regular one first.
He had been about to step in before the rock throwing started, but the rock thrower's accuracy had been so startling that he had waited a few minutes to watch the outcome. That's Janie, Roscoe said, buttoning up what was left of his best shirt. She practices chunking varmints. It's how we've been getting our grub. July quickly handcuffed Jim, who was still writhing around on the grass. The blow to the throat seemed to have damaged his windpipe. He gasped loudly for air, like a drowning man. You might shoot me, but you ain't putting no darn cuffs on me, Udo said when July approached him. This is July Johnson, and I wouldn't fight him, Roscoe said. For some reason, he felt rather friendly to Udo. It was Udo who had been most inclined to kill him. Udo didn't fight, but neither did he get handcuffed, for the simple reason that his wrists were too big. July was forced to tie him with a saddle string, a method he would rather have avoided. A man as large as Udo would eventually stretch out any rope or piece of rawhide if he kept trying. Roscoe managed to get his pants to hold together pretty well, although they were full of holes. As predicted, he could not get his boots on. Joe helped, but the two of them made no headway. It's a good thing you shot, Joe said. We was already camped. July recognized your gun. Oh, was that it? Roscoe said, reluctant to admit that it had been Janie who shot. Once the men were handcuffed and tied, July got them onto their horses and tied their feet to the stirrups. Udo and Jim he knew by reputation, for they had harried the East Texas trails for the last year or two, mostly robbing settlers, but occasionally killing those who put up a fight. He had expected to find Roscoe eventually, but not the two bandits. Now something would have to be done with him before he could even ask Roscoe all the questions he wanted to ask about Elmira. Also, there was the rock thrower, Janie, Roscoe would call her. Why was a Janie traveling with Roscoe? Indeed, where was she? The rock throwing had stopped, but no one had appeared. Now that the danger was past, Roscoe began to feel that there were many awkward matters awaiting explanation. He had forgotten about Elmira and her departure for several days, although her departure was the reason he was in Texas. Also, he would have to explain to July why he was traveling with a young girl. It seemed better to talk about the miracle of July's appearance, but July didn't want to say much about it. I never expected to see you right then, Roscoe said. Then there you were, pointing that gun. This is the main trail to Texas from Fort Smith, July pointed out. If I was looking for you, that's where I'd likely be. Yeah, but I didn't know you was looking for me, Roscoe said. You don't usually. Pete wrote and told me he was on the way, July said. It was all the explanation he planned to offer until he could get Roscoe alone. I guess we're caught, but what next? Udo asked. He did not like to be left out of conversations. Jim, who still had to suck hard to get his breath, showed no inclination to talk. You say there's a girl? July asked. Yeah, Janie. Call her in, July said. Roscoe made an effort, but it went awkwardly. Come
Playing a
on,
little
July's
Diablo
here,
too.
he said loudly into the darkness. It's safe. He's the sheriff I work for, he added just as loudly. There was no sound from the darkness, no sign of Janie. Roscoe could tell July was impatient. It made him nervous. He remembered how Janie had disappeared for 2 hours that afternoon. If she thought July would wait 2 hours, she didn't know much about her. Come on in. We got these men tied, he said, without much hope that Janie would obey. She didn't. There was not a sound to be heard, except for some coyotes singing about a mile away. I suspect that girl has Indian blood, Udo said. She had us ambushed fair and square. And if she was as good with a pistol as she was with a rock, we'd be dead. What's the matter with her, July asked. Why won't she come? I don't know, Roscoe said. She don't take to company, I guess. July thought it a very odd business. Roscoe had never been one to womanize. In fact, around Fort Smith, his skill in avoiding various widow women had often been commented on. And yet he had somehow taken up with a girl who could throw rocks more accurately than most men could shoot. I don't intend to spend the night here, July said. Has she got a horse? No, but she's quick afoot, Roscoe said. She's been keeping ahead of me without no trouble. Where are we going? To Fort Worth, July said. The sheriff there will probably be glad to get these men. Yes, he will. Son of a bitch, Joe said. Roscoe felt bad about going off and leaving Janie, but he couldn't think what to do about it. July tied the two outlaws' horses to a single lead rope and instructed Roscoe and Joe to stay close behind them. It had clouded up and was almost pitch dark, but that had no effect on July's pace, which was fast. Having to deliver the outlaws to justice was taking him out of his way, and there was nothing else for him. When they had been riding about an hour, Roscoe got the scare of his life. Suddenly, someone jumped on the horse behind him. For a terrifying second, he thought Jim must have gotten loose and come to strangle him or stick a knife in him. Memphis was startled too and jumped sideways into Joe's horse. Then he heard the person panic. He knew it was Janie. I couldn't keep up no longer, she said. I thought he'd slow down, but he just keeps going. Joe was so startled to see a girl materialize behind Roscoe that he didn't say a word. He found it hard to credit that the person who had thrown the rocks could be a girl. Yet he had seen the rocks hit the men. How could a girl throw so hard and straight? July had appropriated Hutto's shotgun, loaded it, and put it across his saddle. He assumed it would make the prisoners think twice before starting trouble. His one thought was to get back to Fort Worth, turn the men over, and start at once to look for Elmira. They rode all night, and when the plains got gray, they were no more than 5 miles from Fort Worth. He glanced back at the prisoners and was startled to see the girl riding behind Roscoe. She looked very young. Her bare legs were as thin as a bird's. Roscoe was slumped over the horn asleep. The girl held the reins. She was also watching the two prisoners. Both of them were plenty wide awake. July got down and checked Hutto's knots, which indeed were slipping. I guess you're Janie, he said to the girl. She nodded. July handed her the shotgun to hold while he retied Hutto. All right, God, don't do that. She's apt to cut us in two, Jim said. His voice had a husky croak and a blow on his throat. It pained him to speak, but the sight of the girl with the shotgun clearly pained him more. Joe had managed to get the sleep out of his eyes and was rather aggrieved that July had given the gun to the girl. She was no older than he was, but she was a female. He felt he ought to have been given the shotgun. You don't give a man much of a chance, do you? Hutto said as July retied him. He was a messy sight from all the dried blood on his mouth and his beard, but he seemed cheerful. No, July said. Yeah, if they don't hang us, you better watch out for Jim, Hutto said. Jim hates to have anyone point a gun at him. He's got a vengeful nature, too. Jim did seem vengeful. His eyes were shining with hatred, and he was looking at the girl. The look was so hot that many men would have flinched from it, but the girl didn't. All the while, Roscoe slumped over his horse's neck, snoring away. They were nearly on the outskirts of Fort Worth before he woke up, and it was not until July handed the prisoners over to the sheriff that he began to feel alive. Janie had acted like she wanted to bolt when they came into town. The sight of so many wagons and people clearly upset her, but she held on. July found a livery stable, for it would be necessary to rest the horses for a while. It was run by a woman who kindly offered to scrape up a little breakfast for the youngsters. It consisted of cornbread and bacon, which they ate sitting on big wash tubs outside the woman's house. Roscoe's clothes were practically in ribbons, so much so that the woman laughed when she saw him. She offered to mend his clothes for another 50 cents, but Roscoe had to decline since he had nothing to wear while the work was being done. "This is a big-looking town," Roscoe said. "I guess I can buy myself some clothes." "Not for no 50 cents, the woman said. "That's nothing but a sack the girl's wearing. You ought to get her something decent to wear while you buy her." "Well, I might," Roscoe said. It was true that Janie's dress was a mere rag. Janie seemed to think Fort Worth was quite a sight. She was over her fright. She looked around with interest. "Is that girl your daughter?" the woman asked. "No," Roscoe said. "I never saw her until last week." "Well, she's somebody's daughter, and she deserves better than a sack to wear," the woman said. "That boy dresses all right. How come you skimped on the girl?" "No opportunity," Roscoe said. "I just found her up in the country." The woman had a red face and got redder as she was angry, as she now clearly was. "I don't know what to think of you men," she said, and went into her house and slammed the door. "Where did you get her?" July asked. "I didn't get her exactly," Roscoe said. He felt on the defensive. It was clear that people would think the worst of him, whatever he did. No doubt in Fort Smith, word would be out that instead of sticking to orders, he had run off with the first young girl he could find. "But she run off and followed me," he added. July looked non-committal. "A darn old man beat her and used her hard. That's why she run off," Roscoe elaborated. "Can we go to a saloon? I'd sure fancy a beer." July took him to a saloon and bought him a beer. Now that he had Roscoe alone, he felt curiously reluctant to mention Elmira. Even hearing her name spoken would be painful. "What about Ellie?" he said finally. "Peach said she left." "Well, Peach is right," Roscoe said. "Or if she didn't leave, then she's hiding, or else a bear got her." "Did you see bear tracks?" July asked. "No," Roscoe admitted. "Then a bear didn't get her," July said. "She probably left on the whiskey boat," Roscoe said, trying to hide behind his beer glass. "I don't see why," July said softly, almost to himself. He didn't see why. He had never done anything to disturb her that he could remember. He had never hit her or even spoken harshly to her. What would prompt a woman to run off if nothing was wrong? Of course it wasn't true that nothing had been wrong. Something had been. He just didn't know what. He didn't know why she had married him if she didn't like him. And he had the sense that she didn't. It was true. Peach had hinted a few times that people got married for reasons other than liking, but Peach was known to be cynical. Now, in the saloon, he remembered Peach's hints. Maybe Ellie had never liked him. Maybe she had married him for reasons she hadn't wanted to mention. Thinking about it made him feel really sad. "Did you talk to her at all after I left?" he asked Roscoe. "No," Roscoe admitted. July didn't speak for 5 minutes. Roscoe turned over in his mind various excuses for not seeing
Dude,
Elmira,
Gavin,
but the truth
just a sec.
never once occurred to him to go and see her. He slowly
And then
drank
we'll
his
start
beer.
round 2 eventually.
What about Jake? He asked. He's to the south, July said. He's coming with a trail herd. I want to find Ellie. Once that's done, we'll look for Jake. He fished some money out of his pocket and paid for beers. Maybe you ought to take the young ones and go back to Arkansas, he said. I'm going after Ellie. Well, I'll come with you, Roscoe said. Now that he had found July, he had no intention of losing him again. He had had plenty of trouble coming, yet worse might occur if he tried to go back on his own. I expect if we paid that woman, she'd board the girl, July said. You go buy some duds.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be a laughingstock if you try and travel on those you got on. The woman at the livery stable agreed to board Jamie for $3 a month. July paid for 2 months. When told that she was to stay in Fort Worth, Jamie didn't say a word. The woman spoke to her cheerfully about getting some better clothes, but Jamie sat on the washtub, silent. The woman offered to take Joe, too, and board him free if he would help out around the livery stable. July was tempted. Joe looked so unhappy that he relented and decided to let him stay with her. Then Roscoe showed up, in clothes that looked so stiff it was a wonder he could even walk in them. I guess you might break them clothes in by Christmas, the livery stable woman said, laughing. You look like you're wearing stovepipes. I can't help it if they're black, Roscoe said. It was all they had that fit. He felt sorry about leaving Jamie. What if old Sam got well and tracked him to Fort Worth and found her? He offered her $2 in case she had expenses. But Jamie just shook her head. When they rode off, she was still sitting on the big washtub. Joe was glad she wasn't coming. She made him feel that he didn't do things very well. He didn't have long to enjoy being glad, though. That night, they camped on the plains 20 miles north of Fort Worth. July felt it was all right to sleep without a guard, as there were trail herds on both sides of them. They could hear the night herders singing to the cattle. In the morning, when Joe opened his eyes, Janie was squatted by the cold campfire. She still wore her sack. Even July had not heard her coming. When July woke up, she handed him back the $6 he had given the woman. July just took it, looking surprised. Joe felt annoyed. It was wrong of the girl to come without July's permission. If the Indians carried her off, he for one would not be too sorry. Although, when he thought about it, he realized he himself might be an easier catch. The girl had followed them at night across the plains. It was something that he couldn't have done. All that day, the girl ran along on her own, never getting far behind. She was not like any of the girls Joe had known in Fort Smith, none of whom could have kept up for 5 minutes. Joe didn't know what to make of her, and neither did July or even Roscoe, who had found her. But they soon were far out on the plains, and it was clear to everyone that Janie was along for the trip.
Chapter 53.
Long before the whiskey boat stopped, Elmira knew she was going to have trouble with Big's way. The man had never approached her or even spoken to her, but every time she went out of her shed to sit and watch the water, she felt his eyes. And when they loaded the whiskey in wagons and started across the plains from Bent's Fort, his eyes followed her in whatever wagon she chose to ride for the day. It seemed to her it might be the fact that she was so small that made Big's way so interesting. It was a problem she had had before. Huge men seemed to like her because she was so tiny. Big's way was even larger than the buffalo hunter who caused her to run to July. Sometimes in the evening, when he brought her food, Fowler would sit and talk with her a bit. He had a scar which ran over his nose and down across his lips into his beard. He had a rough look, but his eyes were dreamy. This whiskey hauling business is about petered out, he said one evening. Indians kept the trade going. Now they've got 'em all penned up down in these parts. I may go up north." "Are there many towns up north?" she asked, remembering that Dee had mentioned going north. Dee liked its comforts, hotels, barber shops, and such. Once she had offered to cut his hair and had made a mess of it. Dee had been good-natured about it, but he did remark that it paid to stick to professionals. He was vain about his looks. "There's Ogallala," Fowler said. "That's on the Platte. There's towns in Montana, but that's a long way." Big Sway had a deep voice. She could sometimes hear him talking to the men, even over the creak of the wagon wheels. He wore a long buffalo coat and seldom took it off, even when the days were hot. One morning there was great excitement. Just as the morning mist began to thin, the man on guard claimed to have seen 6 Indians on a ridge. He was a young man, very nervous. If there were Indians, they did not reappear. During the day, the men surprised 3 buffalo and killed one of them. That night, Fowler brought Elmira samples of the liver and the tongue, the best parts, he said. The men had talked about the fort so much that Elmira had supposed it was a real town, but it was just a few scattered buildings, none in good repair. There was only one woman there, the wife of a blacksmith, and she had gone crazy due to the death of all 5 of her children. She sat in a chair all day, saying nothing to anyone. Fowler did his best for Elmira. He got the traders to let her have a little room. Just a tiny, dirty closet, really. It was next to a warehouse where piles of buffalo skins were stored. The smell of the skins was worse than anything that had happened on the river. Her room was full of fleas that had escaped from the skins. She spent much of her time scratching. Though the fort was nothing much to see, it was a busy place, with riders coming and going all the time. Watching them, Elmira wished that she was a man so she could just buy a horse and ride away. The men let her alone, but they did look at her whenever she left her room. There were several wild-looking Mexicans who scared her worse than the buffalo hunters. After a week of scratching, she began to realize she had done a foolish thing, taking the whiskey boat. In Fort Smith, all she had felt was an overwhelming desire to go. The day she left, she felt that her life depended on getting out of Fort Smith that day. She had a fear that July would suddenly show up again. She didn't regret leaving, but neither did she calculate on landing in a place as bad as Bent's Fort. In the cowtown, stages came and went. If you didn't like Dodge, you could always go to Abilene. But no stage came to Bent's Fort.
Can we do a dab after I just finished this one part? Got killed this bad guy. Should be.
Though she had not been bothered, the men of the fort
I'm
looked
only
very
on
rough.
Torment 13.
"They don't think you're worth robbing," Fowler said.
Or
But she
Torment
wasn't
3,
sure
should I
he
say.
was right. Some of the Mexicans looked like they might do worse than rob her if the mood struck them. Once, sitting under the little shed outside her room, she saw a fight between 2 Mexicans. She heard a yell and saw each man pull a knife. They went at one another like butchers. Their clothes were soon bloody, but evidently their cuts were not serious, for after a while they stopped fighting and went back to gambling together. Fowler said there might be a party of hunters going north, and that perhaps they would take her. But a week passed, and the party didn't materialize. Then one day Fowler brought her a little plate of food under her shed. He looked at her sheepishly, as if he had something to say but didn't want to say it. "Big Sway wants to marry you," he said finally, in an apologetic tone. "Well, I'm already married," she said. "What if he just wants to marry you temporary?" Fowler asked. "It's always temporary," Elmira said. "Why don't he ask himself?" "Sway ain't much of a talker," Fowler said. "I've heard him talk," she said. "He talks to the men." Fowler laughed and said no more. Elmira felt angry. She was in a spot if some man was wanting to marry her. Someone had thrown a fresh buffalo skin into the warehouse, and she could hear the flies buzzing on her from where she sat. "He'll take you to Ogallala if you'll do it," Fowler said. You might think about it. He ain't as bad as some. How would you know? She asked. You ain't been married to him. Fowler shrugged. He might be your best bet, he said. I'm going back downriver next week. A couple of hide haulers are taking a load to Kansas. They might take you, but it'd be a hard trip. You'll have to smell them stinking hides all the way. Anyway, the hide haulers are rough, he said. I think Zway will treat you all right. I don't want to go to Kansas, she said. I've been to Kansas. What ruined that was that she was pregnant and showing. Some of the saloons weren't particular, but it was always harder to get work if you were pregnant. Besides, she didn't want to work. She wanted Dee, who wouldn't mind that she was pregnant. Big Zway began to spend hours just watching her. She sat under her shed in one patch of shade, and he sat in another about 30 yards away, just watching. He didn't pretend to gamble or do anything else. Once when he was watching, some riders spotted a little herd of buffalo. The other hunters were wild to go after him. Zway wouldn't go. They yelled at him and argued with him, but he just sat. Finally, they went off without him. One hunter tried to borrow his gun, but Zway wouldn't give it up. He sat there with his big rifle across his lap, looking at Elmira. It became amusing to her power over the man. He had never spoken to her, not one word, and yet he would sit for hours 30 yards away. It was something. What must go through men's minds to cause them to behave so strangely? One morning, she came out of her closet earlier than usual. She had a touch of morning sickness and wanted some fresh air. When she opened the door, she almost bumped into Big Zway, who had just been standing outside her door. Her sudden appearance embarrassed him so that he gave her one appalled look and turned and went off, practically at a trot, putting a safe distance between them. He was a very heavy man, and the sight of him trying to run made her laugh out loud, something she hadn't done in a while. He didn't turn to look back at her again until he was safely back in the spot, and then he turned fearfully, as if he expected to be shot for having stood by her door. Tell him I'll go, she said to Fowler that evening. I guess he ain't so bad. You tell him, Fowler said. The next morning, she walked over to where Big Zway sat. When he saw her coming, it seemed for a second like he might bolt. She was too close. Instead, he sat as if paralyzed, fear in his eyes. I'll go if you think you can get me to Ogallala, she said. I'll pay you what it's worth to you. Zway didn't say anything. How will we travel, she asked. I ain't much good at riding horses. Big Zway didn't respond for about a minute. Elmira was about to lose patience when he brushed his mouth with the back of his hand as if to clean it. Could get that there hide wagon, he said, pointing to a rundown piece of equipment a few yards away. To Elmira, the wagon didn't look like it could travel 10 yards, much less all the way to Nebraska. Could get the blacksmith to fix it, Big Zway said. Now that he had spoken to her and not been struck by lightning, he felt a little easier. Did you mean just us two to go? Elmira asked. The question gave him so much pause that she almost wished he hadn't asked it. He fell silent again, his eyes troubled. Might take Luke, he said. Luke was a weaselly little buffalo hunter with only a thumb and one finger on his left hand. He carried dice and gambled when he could get anyone to gamble. Once on the boat, she had asked Fowler about him, and Fowler said a butcher had cut his fingers off with a cleaver for some reason. When can we go, she asked. It turned out to be a decision Big Zway wasn't immediately up for making. He pondered the matter for some time, but reached no conclusion. I want to get out of here, she said. I'm tired of smelling these buffalo hides. Get that blacksmith to fix that wagon, Zway responded. He stood up, picking up the tongue of the wagon, and began to drag it toward the blacksmith shop, 100 yards away. The next morning, the wagon, more or less patched, was sitting outside her closet. When she walked over to inspect it, she saw that Luke was in it, sleeping off a drunk. He slept with his mouth open, showing black teeth, and not many of them at that. Luke had ignored her on the trip upriver, but when he woke up, he hopped out of the wagon and came right over, a grin on his Weasley face. "Big Zway and I have partnered up," he said. "Do you drive a wagon?" "I guess I could if we go slow," she said. Luke had spiky red hair, stuck out in all directions. A skinning knife, a foot long, was slung in a scabbard under his shoulder. He grinned constantly, exposing his black teeth, and unlike Zway, was not a bit afraid to look her in the eye. He had an insolent manner and spat tobacco juice constantly while he talked. "Zway went to buy some mules," he said. "We got 2 horses, but they won't do for the wagon. Anyway, we might get some hides while you're driving the wagon." "I don't like the smell of hides," she said pointedly, but not pointedly enough for Luke to get the message. "You get to where you don't smell them after a while," he said. "I don't hardly even notice it. I've smelled them so much." Luke had a little quirt and was always nervously popping himself on the leg with it. "You scared to Indians?" he asked. "I don't know," Elmira said. "I guess I don't like them much." "I've already killed 5 of them," Luke said. Big Zway finally arrived leading 2 scrawny mules and carrying a harness that he had traded for. The harness was in bad repair, but there was plenty of rawhide around, and they soon had it tied together fairly well. Luke was quite dexterous with his thumb and little finger. He did better than Zway, whose hands were too big for harness making. She soon got the hang of driving the mules. There was not much to it, for the mules were content to follow the 2 men on horseback. It was only when the men loped off to hunt that the mules were likely to balk. On the second day out, with the men gone, she crossed a creek whose banks were so steep and rough that she felt sure the wagon would turn over. She was ready to jump and take her chances, but by a miracle it stayed upright. That day the men killed 20 buffalo. Elmira had to wait in the sun all day while they skinned them out. Finally she got down and sat under the wagon, which provided a little shade. The men piled the bloody, smelly hides onto the wagon, which didn't suit the mules. They hated the smell of hides as much as she did. Big Zway had lapsed back into silence, leaving all the talking to Luke, who chattered away whether anybody was listening to him or not. Often Elmira had a nervous stomach. The jostling of the wagon took getting used to. The plains looked smooth in the distance, but they were surprisingly rough to pass over. Big Zway had given her a blanket to put over the rough seat. It kept her from getting splinters, but didn't cushion the bumps. Alone with the 2 men in the middle of the great empty prairie, she felt apprehensive. In the cow towns, there had been lots of girls around. If a man had gotten mean, she could yell. On the boat, it hadn't seemed as dangerous, because the men were always fighting and gambling among themselves. But at night on the prairie, there were only the 3 of them, and nothing much to keep anyone busy. Big Zway sat and looked at the campfire, and Luke looked too while he talked. She didn't know if Big Zway considered that in some way he married her already. She worried that he might suddenly come over and want the marriage to begin, though so far he had been too shy even to speak to her much. For all she knew, he might expect her to be married to Luke too, and she didn't want that. The thought made her so nervous that she couldn't eat the buffalo meat they offered her. Anyway, it was tougher than any meat she had ever tried to chew. She chewed on one bite until her jaws got tired and spat it out. But when she went to the wagon and made the one blanket into a kind of bed, neither man followed. She lay awake for a long time, apprehensive, but the men sat by the fire, occasionally looking at her but making no move to disturb her. Luke got his dice out and soon they were playing. Elmira was able to sleep, but awoke to the roll of thunder a few hours later. The men were asleep by the dying fire. A Across the prairie, she began to see lightning darting down the sky. And within a few minutes, big drops of water hit her. In a minute, she was wet. She jumped down and crawled under the wagon. It wasn't much protection, but it was some. Soon the lightning was crashing all around, and the thunder came in big, flat cracks, as if a building had fallen down. It frightened her so that she hugged her knees and trembled. When the lightning struck, the whole prairie would be bathed for a second in white light. The rainstorm soon passed, but she lay awake for the rest of the night, listening to the water drip off the wagon. It grew very dark. She didn't know what might have happened to the men. But in the morning, they were right where they had gone to sleep, wet as muskrats, but ready to drink a pot of coffee. Neither even commented on the storm. Elmira decided that they were used to hard traveling, and that she had better get used to it too. Soon she began to talk to the mules as they plodded along. She didn't say much, and the mules didn't answer, but it made the long, hot days pass a little faster.
Chapter 54.
Augustus spent half the first day finding the tracks, for Blue Duck had been cool enough to lead Lorena through the stampeding cattle, so that their tracks would be blotted out by the thousands of cattle tracks. It was a fine trick, and one not many men would dare to try. Years had passed since Augustus had done any serious tracking. He rode around all morning, trying to remember the last man he had tracked, just to give himself perspective. It seemed to him that the last man had been an incompetent horse thief named Webster Witter, who had rustled horses in the Blanco country at one time. He and Call had gone after him one day by themselves, caught him and hung him before sundown, but the tracking had been elemental, due to the fact that the man had been driving 40 stolen horses. The thing he remembered best about Webster Witter was that he had been a tall man, and they caught him out in the scrub and had to hang him to a short tree. It was that or take him back, and Call was against taking him back. Call believed summary justice was often the only justice, and in those days he was right, since they had to depend on circuit judges who, often as not, didn't show up. If we take him back, he'll bribe the jailer or dig out or something. And we'll have to catch him at it again, Call said. It never occurred to Call to just shoot someone he could hang. And in this instance, Augustus didn't suggest it, for they had rushed out without much ammunition and were traveling in rough country. Fortunately, Webster's neck broke when they whipped the horse out from under him. Otherwise, he would have stood there and laughed at them, for the limb of the mesquite sagged badly and both his feet drug the ground. That had been at least 12 years ago, and Augustus soon concluded that his tracking skills had rusted to the point of being unusable. The only horse tracks he found for the first 3 hours belonged to the Hat Creek horses. He almost decided to go back and get Dietz, though he knew Call would be reluctant to surrender him. Finally, by circling wide to the northwest, Augustus crossed the 3 horses' tracks. Blue Duck had tried the one trick, crossing the stampede, but that was all. After that, the tracks bore straight for the northwest, so unerringly that Augustus soon found he didn't need to pay much attention to them. If he lost them, he could usually pick them up within a half a mile. He rode as hard as he dared, but he had only one horse and couldn't afford to ruin him. At each watering, he let him have a few minutes of rest. He rode all night, and the next day the tracks were still bearing northwest. He felt unhappy with himself, for he wasn't catching up. Lorena was getting a taste of hard travel, the like of which she had never imagined. Probably she would have worse to deal with than hard travel unless she was very lucky, and Augustus knew that it was his fault. He should have packed her into camp the minute he discovered who Blue Duck was. In retrospect, he couldn't imagine why he hadn't. It was the kind of lapse he had been subject to all his life. Things that were clearly dangerous didn't worry him enough. He tried to swallow his regrets and concentrate on finding her. After all, it had happened, and why he had let it no longer particularly mattered. Blue Duck was a name from their past. Having him show up in their midst 15 years later had thrown his reasoning off. The second day, he stopped tracking altogether, since it was plain Blue Duck was heading for the Staked Plains. That took in a lot of territory, of course, but Augustus thought he knew where Blue Duck would go, to an area north and west of Palo Duro Canyon. It was there he had always retreated when pursued. Once Call and he sat on the western edge of the Great Canyon, looking across the brown, waterless distances to the west. They had finally decided to end their pursuit there, while they had a fair chance of getting back alive. It wasn't Indians they feared so much as lack of water. It had been midsummer, and the plains looked seared. What grass there was, brown and brittle. Call was frustrated. He hated to turn back before he caught his man. "There's got to be water out there," Call said. "If they cross it, and they can't drink dirt." "Yes, but they know where it is, and we don't," Augustus pointed out. "They can kill their horses getting to it. They got more horses. But if we kill ours, it's a darn long walk back to San Antonio." That afternoon, he crossed the Clear Fork of the Brazos, past a half-built cabin, abandoned and empty. It was a vivid enough reminder of the power of the Comanches. Their massacres caused plenty of settlers to retreat while they still had legs to retreat on. Call and he had watched through the 50s as the line of the frontier advanced, only to collapse soon after. The men and women who came up the Trinity and the Brazos were no strangers to hardship, but the hardship was one thing, terror another. The land was spacious and theirs for the taking, but the land couldn't cancel out fear, a fact that Call never understood. It annoyed him that the whites gave up and retreated. "I wish they'd stick," he said many times. "If they would, there'd soon be enough of them to beat back the Indians." "You ain't never laid in a bed all night with a scared woman," Augustus said. "You can't start a farm if you've got to live in a fort. Them that starts the farms have got to settle off by themselves, which means they're easy to cut off and carve up." "Well, they could leave the women for a while," Call said. "Send for 'em when it's safe." "Yes, but a man that goes to the trouble to take a wife don't generally want to go off and leave her," Augustus pointed out. "It means doing the chores all by yourself. Besides, without a wife handy, you won't be getting no kids. Kids are a wonderful source of free labor. They're cheaper than slaves by a damn sight." They had argued the point for years, but fruitlessly, for Call had no sympathy for human weakness. Augustus put it down to a lack of imagination. Call could never imagine what it was like to be scared. They had been in tight spots, but usually that meant action. And in battles, things happened too fast for fear to paralyze the mind of a man like Call. He couldn't imagine what it was like to go to bed every night scared that you and your family would feel the knives of the Comanches before sunrise. That night, Augustus stopped to rest his horse, making a cold camp on a little bluff and eating some jerky he had brought along. He was in the scrubby post oak country near the Brazos. From his bluff, he could see far across the moonlit valleys. It struck him that he had forgotten emptiness, such as existed in the country that stretched around him. After all, for years he had lived within the sound of the piano from the drive-in, the sound of the church bell in the little Lonesome Dove church, the sound of Bowl whacking the dinner bell. He even slept within the sound of P.I.'s snoring, which was as regular as the ticking of a clock. But here there was no sound, not any. The coyotes were silent, the crickets, the locusts, the owls. There was only the sound of his own horse grazing. From him to the stars in all directions, there was only silence, emptiness. Not the talk of men over their cars, nothing. Though he had ridden hard, he felt strangely rested, just from the silence. The next day he found the carcass of Lori's mare. By the end of the day he was out of the scrub. When he crossed the Wichita, he angled west. He had not seen Blue Duck's tracks in 2 days, but he didn't care. He had always had confidence in his instincts and felt he knew where the man would stop. Possibly he was bound for Adobe Walls, one of the Bent's old forts. This one, on the Canadian, had never been much of a success. The Bents had abandoned it, and it became a well-known gathering place for buffalo hunters, as well as for anyone crossing the plains. It was spring. What few buffalo were left would be moving north, and what buffalo hunters were left would be gathered at the old fort, getting ready for a last hide harvest. Buffalo hunters were not known to be too particular about their company. Though Blue Duck and his men had picked off plenty of them over the years, the new crop would probably overlook that fact if he turned up with a prize like Lorena. Also, there were still renegade bands of Kiowas and Comanches loose on the plains. The bands were supposedly scattered. At least that was the talk of South Texas, and the trade in captives virtually dead. But Augustus wasn't in South Texas anymore, and as he rode through the empty country, he had plenty of time to consider that maybe the talk hadn't been all that accurate. Talk often wasn't. The bands were doomed, but they might last another year or two, whereas he was advancing into their country in the here and now. He wasn't afraid for himself, but he was afraid for Lorena. Blue Duck might be dealing with some renegade chief with a taste for white women. Lorena would put a nice cap on a career largely devoted to stealing children. If Blue Duck intended to trade her to an Indian, he would probably take her farther west, through the region known as the Chautauqua, and then north to a crossing on the Canadian, where the Comanches had traded captives for decades. Nearby was the famous Valley of Tears, spoken of with anguish by such captives as had been recovered. There, the Comancheros divided captives, mothers being separated from their children and sold to different bands, the theory being that if they were isolated, they would be less likely to organize escapes. As he moved into the Chautauqua, a parched country where shallow red canyons stretched west toward the Palo Duro, Augustus would see little spiraling dust devils rising from the exposed earth far ahead of him. During the heat of the day, mirages in the form of flat lakes appeared, so vivid that a time or two he almost convinced himself that there was water ahead, although he knew there wasn't. He decided to head first for the big crossing on the Canadian. If there was no sign of Blue Duck there, he could always follow the river over to the walls. He crossed the Prairie Dog Fork of the Red River. Plenty of prairie dogs were in evidence, too, and rode west to the edge of the Palo Duro. Several times he saw small herds of buffalo, and twice rode through the valleys of bleached bones, places where hunters had slaughtered several hundred animals at a time. By good luck, he found a spring and spent the night by it, resting his horse for the final push. Late the next day, he came into the breaks of the Canadian, a country of shallow, eroded gullies. He could see where the river curved east across the plains. He rode east for several miles, hoping to cross Blue Duck's tracks. He didn't, which convinced him he had guessed wrong in coming so far west. The man had probably gone directly to the walls, pitched Lorena into the laps of a bunch of buffalo hunters. Before he had time to lament his error, though, Augustus saw a sight which took his mind off it completely. He saw a speck moving across the plains north toward the river. At first he thought it might be Blue Duck, but if so, he was traveling without Lorena. There was only one speck. His horse saw the speck too. Augustus drew his rifle in case the speck turned out to be hostile. He loped toward it only to discover an old man with a dirty white beard pushing a wheelbarrow across the plains. The wheelbarrow contained buffalo bones, and as if that wasn't unusual enough, Augustus found that he even knew the man. His name was Os Frank, and he had started as a mountain man, trapping beaver. He had once kept a store in Waco, but for some reason got mad and robbed a bank next to his store. The bank had thought they were getting along with him fine until the day he walked in and robbed them. Augustus and Call were in Waco at the time, and though Call was reluctant to bother with bank robbers, he felt bad for how stupid they deserved robbing. They were persuaded to go after him. They caught him right away, but not without a gun battle. The battle took place in a thicket on the Brazos, where Os Frank had stopped to cook some venison. It went on for 2 hours and resulted in no injuries. Then Os Frank ran out of ammunition. It had been easy enough to arrest. He cursed them all the way back to Waco and broke out of jail the day they left town. Augustus had not heard of him since, yet there he was, wheeling a barrel full of buffalo bones across the high plains. He didn't seem to be armed, so Augustus rode right up to it, keeping his rifle across his saddle. The old robber could well have a pistol hidden in the bones, though unless his aim had improved, he was not much of a threat, even if he did. "Hello, Oss," Augustus said as he rode up. "Have you gone into bone business or what?" The old man squinted at him for a moment, but made no reply. He kept on wheeling his barrel full of bones over the rough ground. Tobacco drippings stained his beard until most of it was a deep brown. "I guess you don't remember me," Augustus said, falling in beside him. "I'm Captain McCrae. We shot at one another all afternoon once up on the Brazos. You was in one thicket, and me and Captain Call was in the next one. We pruned the post oaks with all that shooting, and then we stuck you in jail and you crawled right out again." "I don't like you much," Oss Frank said, still trembling. "Put me in the goddamn jail." "Well, why'd you rob that bank?" Augustus said. "It ain't Christian to rob your neighbors. It ain't Christian to hold a grudge, neither. Wasn't you born into the Christian religion?" "No," Oss Frank said. "What do you want?" "White girl," Augustus said. "Pretty one. Outlaw carried her off. You may know him. His name is Blue Duck." Oss Frank stopped the wheelbarrow. He needed to spit and leaned over and spat a large mouthful of tobacco juice directly into the hole of a red ant. The ants, annoyed, scurried about in all directions. Augustus laughed. Oss Frank had always been an original. In Waco, as he remembered, he had caused controversy because he never seemed to sleep. The lantern in his store would be on at all hours of the night, and the man would often be seen roaming the streets at 3 in the morning. Nobody knew what he was looking for, or if he found it. "Now that's a new trick," Augustus said. "Spitting on ants. I guess that's all you've got to do besides haul bones." Oss Frank resumed his walk. Augustus followed along, amused at the strange turns life took. Soon they came down into the valley of the Canadian. Augustus was amazed to see an enormous pyramid of buffalo perhaps 50 yards in the water. The bones were piled so high it seemed to him Oss Frank must have a ladder to use in his piling, though he saw no sign of it. Down on the river, a quarter of a mile, there was another pyramid, just as large. "Well, Oss, I see you've been busy. You'll be so rich one of these days some bank will come along and rob you. Who do you sell these bones to?" Oss Frank ignored the question. While Augustus watched, he pushed his wheelbarrow up to the bottom of the pyramid of bones and began to throw the bones as high as possible up on the pyramid. Once or twice he got a leg bone or a thigh bone all the way to the top, but most of the bones hit midway and stuck. In 5 minutes, the big wheelbarrow was empty. Without a word, Oss Frank took the wheelbarrow and started backing off. Augustus decided to rest while the old man worked. Such camp as there was rudimentary. Oss had dug a little cave in one of the red bluffs south of the river, and his gear was piled in front of him. There was a buffalo gun and a few pots and pans, and that was it. The main crossing was a mile downriver, and Augustus rode down to inspect it. There were horse tracks galore, but not those he was looking for. He saw 5 pyramids of bones between the crossing and Oss Frank's camp, each containing several tons of bones. Back at the camp, Augustus rested in the shade of the little bluff. Oss Frank continued to haul bones until sundown. After pitching his last load up the pyramid, he wheeled the barrow to his camp, turned it over, and sat on it. He looked at Augustus for 2 or 3 minutes without saying anything. "Well, are you going to invite me for supper or not?" Augustus asked. "Never should have arrested me," Oss Frank said. "I don't like that goddamn bank." "You didn't stay in jail but 4 hours," Augustus reminded him. "Now that I've seen how hard you work, I'd say you probably needed a rest. You could have studied English or something. See, you've learned it finally. I don't like that goddamn bank, Boss repeated. Let's talk about something else, Augustus suggested. You're just lucky you didn't get shot on account of that bank. Me and Carl were both fine shots in those days. The thicket was the only thing that saved us. They cheated me because I couldn't talk good, Boss Frank said.
Tango Chew's a little rough for
You
him.
got a one-track mind, Boss, Augustus said. You
Tango
and half
Chew's
of
the roach
mankind.
meat one.
How long you been up here on the Canadian River? I come here 5 years, I said. I want a store. That's fine, but you've outrun the people, Augustus said. They won't be along for another 10 years or so. I guess by then you'll have a hell of a stock of buffalo bones. I just hope there's a demand for them. Had a wagon, Boss said. Got stolen. Apache's got it. That's so, Augustus said. I didn't know the Apaches lived around here. Over by the Pecos, Boss said. I quit the mountains. Don't like snow. I'll pass on snow myself when I have the option, Augustus said. This is a lonely place you've settled in, though. Don't the Indians bother you? They leave me be, I said. That one you're hunting, he's a mean one. He killed Bob, built a fire under him, let him sizzle. They don't bother me, though, he added. Killed Bob and let me be. Bob who? Old Bob. I was in the mountains with, Foss said. Well, his burning days are over if I find it, Augustus said. He's quick, Blue Duck, Foss said. He has some Kiowas with him. They ate my dog. How many Kiowas? Augustus asked. It was a big dog, Foss said. Killed 2 wolves. I had a few sheep once, but the Mexicans run them off. It's a chancy life out here on the plains, Augustus said. I bet you get a nice breeze in the winter, too. Them Kiowas ate that dog, Moss repeated. Good dog. Why ain't Blue Duck killed you? Augustus asked. Laughs at me, Moss said. Laughs at my bones. He'll kill me when he's ready. How many Kiowas does he run around with? Augustus asked again. The old man was evidently not used to having anyone to talk to. His remarks came out a little jerky. 6, Frank said. Who's over at the walls? Augustus asked. The old man didn't answer. Darkness had fallen, and Augustus could barely see him sitting on his wheelbarrow. No beaver in this river, Frank said after several minutes. No beaver'd be foolish enough to be in this river, Augustus said. There ain't a tree within 20 miles, and beavers like to gnaw trees. You should have stayed up north if you liked beavers. I'd rather gather these bones, the old man said. You don't have to get your feet wet. Did you get to Montana when you was a beaver man? Augustus waited several minutes for a reply, but the old man never answered. When the moon came up, Augustus saw that he had fallen asleep sitting on his wheelbarrow, his head fallen over in his arms. Augustus was tired and hungry. He lay where he was, thinking about food, but making no effort to get up and fix any, if there was any to be fixed. While he was thinking he ought to get up and eat, he fell asleep. Deep in the night, a sound disturbed him, and he came awake and drew his pistol. It was well on toward morning. He could tell that by the moon. The sound was new to him. Cautiously, he turned over, only to see at once that the source of the sound was Oss Frank. He had risen in the night and collected another load of buffalo bones. Now he was heaving him up on the pyramid. The sound that had awakened Augustus was the sound of bones, clicking, rattling as they slid down the sides of the pyramid. Augustus holstered his pistol and walked over to watch the old man. You're an unusual fellow, Oss, he said. I guess you just work night and day. You should have partnered up with Woodrow Call. He's as crazy about work as you are. The two of you might own the whole world by now if you'd hooked up.
Oh, the day wasn't too bad. Can't complain. Went
He
out,
had emptied the wheelbarrow, pushed it up the slope
paid
away from the
bills.
river. Augustus caught his horse, rode east. On his way, he saw Oss Frank again, working under the moonlight. He had plenty to work with, for the plain around was littered with buffalo bones. It looked as if a whole herd had been wiped out, for a road of bones stretched far across the plain. He remembered when he had first come to the high plains years before. For 2 days, he and Call and the Rangers had ridden parallel to the great southern buffalo herd, hundreds of thousands of animals slowly grazing north. It had been difficult to sleep at night because the horses was around so many animals. The sounds of the herd were constant. They had ridden for nearly 100 miles and seldom been out of sight of the buffalo. Of course, they had heard that the buffalo were being wiped out, but with the memory of the southern herd so vivid, they had hardly credited the news. Discussing it in Lonesome Dove, they had decided that the reports must be exaggerated, thinned out maybe, but not wiped out. Thus, the sight of the road of bones stretching over the prairie was a shock. Maybe roads of bones were all that was left. The thought gave the very emptiness of the plains a different feel. With those millions of animals gone, and the Indians mostly gone in their wake, the plains were truly empty, unpeopled and ungrazed. Soon the whites would come, of course, but what he was seeing was a moment between. Not the plains as they had been, or as they would be, but a moment of true emptiness, with thousands of miles of grass resting unused, occupied only by remnants of the buffalo, the Indians, the hunters. Augustus thought they were crazed remnants, mostly like the old man who worked night and day gathering bones to no purpose. No wonder you never worked out in Waco, Oss, he said, speaking as much to himself as to the old man. Oss Frank was not in a talkative mood, or a listening mood either. He had filled his wheelbarrow and was heading back to camp. I'm going to the walls to kill that big renegade for you, Augustus said. Need anything? Oss Frank stopped, as if thinking it over. Wish they'd hadn't killed that dog, he said. I like that dog. It was them Kiowas that killed him, not the Mexicans. 6 Kiowas. Well, I got 6 bullets, Augustus said. Maybe I'll send the rascals where your dog went. Them Kiowas shot Bob's horse, Paul said. That's how come they caught him. Built a fire under him and cooked him. That's their way. Then he lifted his wheelbarrow full of bones and walked off toward the Canadian River. The light was just coming, the plains black in the distance, the sky gray where it met the land. Though dawn was his favorite hour, it was also an hour at which Augustus most keenly felt himself to be a fool. What was it but folly to be riding along the Canadian River alone, easy pickings for an outlaw gang, hungry to boot? A chain of follies put him there. Call's abrupt decision to become a cattleman, and his own decision, equally abrupt, to try and rescue a girl foolish enough to be taken in by Jake Spoon. None of it was sensible. Yet he had to admit that there was something about such follies that he liked. The sensible way, which he had pursued once or twice in his life, had always proved boring, usually within a few days. In his case, it had led to nothing much, just excessive drunkenness, reckless card playing. There was more enterprise in certain follies, it seemed to him. As the sun lit the grass, he rode east along the road of buffalo bones.
Chapter 55.
Monkey John hated it that she wouldn't talk. By God, I'll cut your tongue out if you ain't going to use it, he said once. And he knocked her down and sat on her, his big knife an inch from her face, until Dogface threatened to shoot him if he didn't let her be. Lorena expected him to do it. He was the worst man she had ever known, worse even than Irmoki and the Kiowas, though they were bad enough. She shut her eyes, expecting to feel the knife, but Dogface cocked his pistol and Monkey John didn't cut her. He continued to sit on her chest, though, arguing with Dogface about her silence. What do you care if she talks, Dogface said. I wouldn't talk to you either, you goddamn old runt. She can talk, goddamn her, Monkey John said. Duck said she talked to him. It's her business if she don't want to talk, Dogface insisted. He was a thin scarecrow of a man, but he had crazy eyes, and Monkey John never pushed him too far. By God, we bought her, Monkey John said. Give all them hides for her. She ought to do what we say. You get your damn money's worth, Dogface said. Most of them hides was mine anyway. You old runt, he added. Monkey John was old and short. His hair was a dirty white. He was under 5 feet. But that didn't keep him from being mean. Twice he had grabbed sticks out of the fire and beat her with them. There was nothing she could do but curl up as tight as she could. Her back and legs were soon burned and bruised, and she knew Monkey John would do worse than that if he got her alone long enough. But Dogface owned half of her, and he stuck close to be sure his investment didn't get too damaged. Though she had seen Dogface and Monkey John give Blue Duck the skins in trade for her, it seemed they weren't full owners, for whenever the Kiowa showed up every 2 or 3 days, they drug her off to their camp for their share, and the 2 white men didn't try to stop them. There was no love lost between the white men and the Kiowas, but both sides were too afraid of Blue Duck to get into it with one another. Blue Duck was the only man of the bunch who seemed to take no interest in her. He had stolen her to sell, and he had sold her. It was clear that he didn't care what they did to her. When he was in camp, he spent his time cleaning his gun or smoking, and seldom even looked her way. Monkey John was bad, but Blue Duck still scared her more. His cold, empty eyes frightened her more than Monkey John's anger or Dogface's craziness. Blue Duck had scared the talk completely out of her. She had never been much for talk, but her silence in the camp was different from her old silence. And Lonesome Dove, she had often hidden her words, but she could find them if she needed them. She had brought them out quick enough when Jake came along. Now speech had left her, fear took its place. The 2 white men talked constantly of killing. Blue Duck didn't talk about it, but she knew he could do it whenever it pleased him. She didn't expect to live to the end of any day. Only the fact that the men weren't tired of her yet kept her alive. When they did tire, they would kill her. She thought about how it would happen, but couldn't picture it in her mind. She only hoped it wasn't Blue Duck that finally did it. She was so dirty and stank so that it seemed strange that men would even want to use her. But of course, they were even dirtier and stank worse. They camped not far from a creek, but none of the men ever washed. Monkey John told her several times what he would do to her if she tried to run away. Terrible things, on the order of what Blue Duck had threatened on the morning after he had kidnapped her, only worse if possible. He said he would sew her up with rawhide thread so tight she couldn't make water, and then would watch her until she burst. Lorena tried to shut her mind when he talked like that. She knew the trick of not talking, and was learning not to hear. At night, she wondered sometimes if she could just learn to die. She wanted to, and imagined how angry they would be if they woke up one morning and she was dead so they could get no more from her. But she couldn't learn that trick. She thought of being dead, but she didn't die. And she didn't try to escape either. She didn't know where she was, for the plain stretched around, empty and bare, as far as she could see. They had horses, and they would catch her and do something to her, or else give her to the Kiowas. Monkey John threatened that too, describing what the Kiowas would do if they got a chance. At night, that was mostly what the men talked about, what the Indians did to people they caught. She believed it. Often with the Kiowas, she felt a deep fright come over her. They did what they wanted with her, but it wasn't enough. She could see them looking at her after they finished, and the looks made her more scared even than the things Monkey John threatened. The Kiowas just looked, but there was something in their looks that made her wish she could be dead and not have to think about it. Blue Duck came and went. Some days he would be there at the camp, sharpening his knife. Other days he would ride off. Sometimes the Kiowas went with him. Other days they sat around their camp.
Hey, James Money, how you
Monkey
doing,
John
bro?
swore at them.
Hope
The
you're doing
Kiowas
well.
didn't listen. They laughed at the old man and gave him looks of the sort they gave Lorena. It wasn't only women that they could do things to. One day the Kiowas found a crippled cow, left by some herd. The cow had split a hoof and could barely hobble along on 3 legs. The Kiowas poked it with their lances, got it inside of camp. Then one of them hit it in the head with an axe, and the cow fell dead. The Kiowas split open the cow's stomach and began to pull out her guts. They sliced off strips of the white guts and squeezed out what was in them, eating it greedily. That's what he said he'd do to me, Lorena thought. Pull out my guts like that cow. Look at them darn gut eaters, Dogface said. I'd be darned if I'd eat guts raw. You might if you was hungry, John said. They ain't hungry, they got the whole cow, Dogface pointed out. If there was hope for her, Lorena knew it lay with Dogface. He was rough and crazy, but he wasn't hard like the old man. He might cuff her if she disappointed him, but he didn't beat her with hot sticks or kick her stomach like the old man did. At times she caught Dogface looking at her in a friendly way. He was getting so he didn't like Monkey John to hurt her or even touch her. He was cautious about what he said, for the old man would flare up in an instant. But when Monkey John bothered her, Dogface got restless and would often take his gun and leave the camp. Monkey John didn't care. He played with her roughly, whether anyone was in camp or not. One night, Blue Duck rode in from one of his mysterious trips with some whiskey, which he dispensed freely, both to the 2 white men and to the Kiowas. Blue Duck drank with them, but not much. Whereas in an hour, Monkey John, Dogface, and the Kiowas were very drunk. It was a hot night, but they built a big campfire and sat around it, passing the bottle from hand to hand. Lorena began to feel frightened. Blue Duck had not so much as looked at her, but she felt something was about to happen. He had several bottles of whiskey, and as soon as the men finished one, he handed them another. Monkey John was particularly sloppy when he drank. The whiskey ran out the corners of his mouth and into his dirty beard. Once he stood up and made water without even turning his back. You could go off a ways, Dogface said. I don't want to sit in your piss. The old man continued to make water, most of it hitting the campfire and making a spitting sound. But some splattered on the ground near where Dogface sat. I could, but I ain't about to, the old man said. Scoot back if you're afraid of a little piss. Blue Duck spread a blanket near the fire and began to roll dice on it. The Kiowas immediately got excited. Moki grabbed the dice and rolled them several times. Each of the Kiowas had a try, but Monkey John scoffed at their efforts. Them gut eaters can't throw dice. You better be quiet, Blue Duck said. Moki wouldn't mind frying your liver. He tries it and I'll blow a hole through him you could catch rainwater through, Monkey John said. Let's gamble. I ain't had a game in a while. Gamble for what? Dogface asked. All I got is my gun, and I'd be in pretty shape without that. Or my horses. Put up your horses then, Blue Duck said. You might win. Dogface shook his head. I don't know much, Dogface said. But I know better than to bet my darn horses. There ain't nowhere to walk to from this Canadian that a man can get to on foot. Yet an hour later, he lost his horses to Blue Duck. Monkey John lost his on the first roll. Before long, Blue Duck had won all the horses, though many of the Indians were so drunk they hardly seemed to know what was happening. Blue Duck had a heavy, square face. He kept shaking the dice in his big hand. Sometimes he would play with a strand of his shaggy hair, as a girl would. Sometimes Lorena thought maybe she could grab a gun and shoot him. The men left their rifles laying around. But the gun hadn't worked when she tried to shoot Tinkersley. And if she tried to shoot Blue Duck and it didn't kill him, she would be in for it. She might be in for it anyway, though it seemed to her the men were scared of him too. Even Monkey John was cautious when Blue Duck was around. They might be glad to see him dead. She didn't try it. It was because she was so frightened of him that she wanted to, yet the same fright kept her from it. Well, now I've won the livestock, Blue Duck said. Or most of it. Most of it? Hell, you won it all, Monkey John said. We're stuck on this goddamn river. I ain't won the girl, Blue Duck said. A woman ain't livestock, Dogface said. This one is. I bought and sold better animals than her many times. Well, she's ours, Monkey John said. She's just half yours, Blue Duck reminded him. Moki and his boys on a half interest. We was aiming to buy them out, Dogface said. Blue Duck laughed, a steady laugh. By the time you raise the money, there won't be much left to buy, he said. You'd do better to buy a goat. Don't want no goddamn goat, Dogface said. He was nervous about the turn the conversation was taking. Let's gamble some more, Blue Duck said, shaking the dice at her Moki. Bet me your half interest in the woman. If you win, I'll let you have your horses back. Her Moki shook his head, looking at Lorena briefly across the campfire. No, he said. We want the woman. Come on, let's gamble, Blue Duck said, a threatening tone in his voice. All the Kiowas looked at him. The two white men kept quiet. The Kiowas began to argue among themselves. Lorena didn't understand their gabble, but it was clear some wanted to gamble and some didn't. Some wanted their horses back. Moki finally changed his mind, though he kept looking across the fire at her. It was as if he wanted her to know he had his plans for her, however the game turned out. All the Kiowas finally agreed to gamble except one, the youngest. He didn't want it. He was skinny, very young looking, no more than 16, but he was more interested in her than the rest. Sometimes in the Kiowa camp, he had 2 turns, or even 3. The older men laughed at his appetite and tried to distract him when he covered her, but he ignored them. Now he balked. He didn't look up, just kept his eyes down and shook his head. The Kiowas yelled at him, but he didn't respond. He just kept shaking his head. He didn't want to risk his interest in her. That damn chigger's holding up the game, Blue Duck said to her Moki. He stood up and walked a few steps into the darkness. In a minute, they heard him making water. The Kiowas were still drinking whiskey. Now, Moki was in the mood to gamble. He reached over and shook the young man, trying to get him to agree, but the young man looked sullenly at the ground. Suddenly, there was a shot, startling them all, and the young man flopped backwards. Blue Duck stepped back into the firelight, a rifle in his hands. The Indians were speechless. Blue Duck sat down, the rifle across his lap, and rattled the dice again. The young Indian's feet were still in the light, but the feet didn't move. By God, life's cheap up here on the goddamn Canadian, Monkey John said. Cheap. And it might get cheaper, Blue Duck said. Then the gambling started again. The dead boy was ignored. In a few minutes, Blue Duck had won her back, not only what the Indians owned, but what the white men owned too. Dogface didn't want to play, but he also didn't want to die. He played and lost, and so did Monkey John. I think you're a goddamn cheat, Monkey John said, drunk enough to be reckless. I think you cheated me out of our horses, and now you've cheated us out of this woman. I don't want the woman, Blue Duck said. You men can have her back as a gift, and your horses too, provided you do me one favor. I'll bet it's a hell of a big favor, Dogface said. What do you want us to do, attack a fort? Blue Duck chuckled. There's an old man following me, he said. He went west, but he'll be coming along one of these days. I want you to kill him. You hear that, Amoki? He added. You can have your horses back, and the woman too. Just kill that old man. I hear he's coming down the river. I'd like to know who you hear it from, Monkey John asked. He's been following me ever since I stole the woman, Blue Duck said. He ain't no tracker, though. He went off across the Wataqua, but now he's figured it out, and he'll be coming. By God, he must want her bad to come all this way, Monkey John said. Kill him tomorrow, Blue Duck said, looking at Monkey. Take some of the horses and go find some help. Monkey was drunk and angry. We do it, he said. Then we take the woman. The hell you will, Dogface said. We're in on this. She's half ours. You ain't taking her nowhere. You shut up or I'll kill you like that chigger, Blue Duck said. You get some help, he said again, looking at Monkey. I doubt you five can kill that old man. Hell, what is he, Monkey John said. 5 against 1's nice odds. These 5 can't shoot, Blue Duck said. They can whoop and holler, but they can't shoot. That old man can. That makes a difference, Dogface agreed. I can shoot. If he gets past Monkey, I'll finish him. Somebody better settle him, Blue Duck said. Otherwise, you'll all be dead. The Kiowa stood up and drugged the dead boy away. Lorena heard them arguing in the darkness. Blue Duck sat where he was, his rifle across his lap. He seemed half asleep. Monkey John got up and came over to her. Who is this old man? He asked. You got a husband? Lorena stayed in her silence. It infuriated Monkey John. He grabbed her by the hair and cuffed her, knocking her over. Then he grabbed a stick of wood and was about to beat her with it when Dogface intervened. Put it down, he said. You beat her enough. Let her answer me then, Monkey John said. She can talk. Doc says so. Dogface picked up his rifle. Monkey John still had the stick. You'd pull a gun on me over a whore, Monkey John said. I ain't gonna shoot you, but I'll break your head if you don't let her be, Dogface said. Monkey John was too drunk to listen. He charged Dogface and swung the stick at him, but Dogface wasn't as drunk. He hit Monkey John with the barrel of his rifle. The old man went loop-leg and dropped his stick. Then he dropped too, falling on the stick. I'd have let him be, Blue Duck said. I ain't you, Dogface said. In the night, Lorena tried to sort it out in her mind. She had been hungry so much, tired so much, scared so much that her mind didn't work well anymore. Sometimes she would try to remember something and couldn't. It was as if her mind and memory had gone to be hidden somewhere until things were better. Dogface had given her an old blanket. Otherwise, she would have had to sleep on the ground in what was left of her clothes. She wrapped the blanket around her and tried to think back over the talk. It meant Gus was coming. It was Gus Blue Duck wanted the Kiowas to kill. She had almost forgotten he was following her. Life had gotten so hard. The Kiowas had been sent to kill him, so Gus might never arrive. It was hard to believe that Gus would get her out. The times when she had known him had been so different from the hard times. She didn't think she would ever get out. Blue Duck was too bad. Dogface was her only chance, and Dogface was scared of Blue Duck. Sooner or later, Blue Duck would give her to Monkey or someone just as hard. If that was going to happen, it was better that her mind had gone to hide. In the gray dawn, she saw the Kiowas leave. Blue Duck talked to them in Indian talk and gave them some bullets to kill Gus with. He woke Dogface and shook Monkey John more or less awake. If he gets past her, Monkey, you two kill him, he said, and then he left. Monkey John looked awful. He had a bloody lump on his head and a hangover. He had slept with his face in the dirt all night, and an ant had stung him several times, leaving one eye swollen nearly shut. He got to his feet, but he could hardly stand. How's he think I can shoot? He asked Dogface.
Cheers.
I can't see but from one eye. And it's the wrong eye. Put some mud on it. It's just ant bites, Dogface said. He was cleaning his gun.
Chapter 56.
Augustus was a little put out with himself for doing such a poor job of tracking.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this life for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keep stopping by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. But until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.